Your grocery bill is about to skyrocket because a war thousands of miles away just broke the supply chain for American farmers. In Stark County, Ohio, the silence in the fields is deafening. A massive John Deere tractor sits completely motionless in the center of the yard, its engine cold and its fuel tank empty. It is not a lack of crops, but a lack of critical components that is now dismantling the American family farm. Tires caked in the dark, heavy soil of a season that refuses to start. I'm Allison Hartzell, a reporter for Cleveland.com, and I've spent the last 3 weeks tracking the invisible tether that connects the muddy fields of the Midwest to the strategic waterways of the Middle East. Most people look at a headline about the Strait of Hormuz and see politics. But for the farmers I've been sitting with, they don't see politics. They see an eviction notice. Let's look at the math behind the crisis. On February 28th, 2026, the global map changed in an instant. The launch of Operation Epic Fury against Iranian military targets triggered a rapid, cascading closure of the Strait of Hormuz. This isn't just a shipping lane, it's the throat of the global economy. About one-third of the world's fertilizer trade flows through those waters. When the taps tightened, the prices didn't just tick up, they exploded. Nitrogen-based fertilizer, the absolute lifeblood of modern corn production, was hovering around $828 per ton before the conflict. By mid-April, it hit $1,123. That's a massive jump. Think about a farm that needs hundreds of tons to make a single season viable. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in added costs appearing on a spreadsheet overnight, money that simply does not exist for a small-scale operator already scraping by on razor-thin margins. Now, here is where the story gets personal. I spoke with a family in Ohio, a third-generation operation that has weathered droughts, floods, and market crashes for over 60 years. They told me about the morning they called their local supplier. They needed to lock in their input costs for the spring planting. The voice on the other end of the line was apologetic, but firm. The supplier didn't have enough product to fulfill the order, and the prices they were quoting were subject to change every 24 hours because of the volatility in fuel and energy markets. Farm diesel costs had jumped 46% in just a few weeks. The father, a man who prides himself on his foresight, had tears in his eyes as he described the feeling of standing in his shed, staring at machinery he couldn't afford to run. If this is clicking for you, hit the subscribe button. I track the stories that bridge the gap between policy and reality, and the next piece of this puzzle is even more critical. All right, now for the part of this story that nobody wants to talk about. We need to discuss the luck factor. Agricultural economists have noted a stark divide forming across the rural landscape. It's the difference between the protected and the vulnerable. Those farmers who had the capital or the credit to pre-book and prepay for their fertilizer back in late 2025 are, for the most part, safe. They locked in the old prices. They are planting their fields with a sense of security. But the others? The farmers who waited until the spring, the ones who follow the just-in-time inventory model to save on storage and interest, they are the ones facing immediate existential insolvency. It's a cruel game of timing where a decision made while eating dinner in November has become a life or death choice for the business in May. Some are choosing to leave fields fallow, cutting their potential yield by half just to keep the bank from taking the farm. Others are taking on high-interest debt that will bury their profit margins for years to come. But there is one more dimension to this that you need to understand, and this is the one that touches your life directly. I'm talking about the price of food. We are witnessing a ripple effect that will hit your grocery store shelves by late 2026 and continue well into 2027. When you see a farmer cutting fertilizer application by 30% to survive a cost spike, that farmer is effectively planning for a lower yield per acre. Less grain on the market means higher commodity prices globally. You might think your grocery bill is a local issue, but it is ultimately decided by the availability of nitrogen in an Ohio field, which is decided by the flow of oil in the Strait of Hormuz. It's a systemic vulnerability that leaves both the producer and the consumer exposed to the same distant storm. The families I interviewed didn't ask for a geopolitical crisis. They didn't ask to have their survival tied to the deployment of U.S. naval assets. They just wanted to plant their corn, harvest it, and pass the land to their children. One farmer told me, "It just feels like the world is trying to take this all away from us right now." Let that sit for a second. The weight of that statement is the true cost of global instability. We often talk about foreign policy in terms of national interest or defense strategy, but we rarely calculate the cost in rural livelihoods or the future stability of our food supply. We are seeing a 46% increase in farm bankruptcies compared to the previous 2 years, and this conflict is effectively acting as the final crushing weight on an industry already standing on the edge. The uncertainty of this harvest isn't just about the weather anymore. It's about a supply chain that has become brittle and a globalized economy that demands payment from the most vulnerable links first. So, what happens next? As of May 6th, 2026, the situation remains in a state of fragile, shaky ceasefire. But for the farmer in Ohio, the calendar hasn't paused to wait for the diplomats. The window for planting is closing. Every day that tractor sits idle because the fertilizer is too expensive or unavailable is a day of lost potential. The ripple effect of the 2026 Iran war is not going to end when the headlines change. It is baked into the dirt, the cost of equipment, and the debt load of our local food producers. If you found this insight helpful, share this video with someone who needs to see the real human cost of these international headlines. Subscribe so you don't miss our next investigation because we have a piece coming next week that explores how these same supply chains are being redesigned to prevent a total collapse in the future. We'll be looking at the move toward localized fertilizer production and what it means for the independence of the American farmer. It's a shift that could define the next decade of agriculture. Stick around for that one. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned to the local reality behind the global story.